Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this exciting fireside chat. Thanks to the XRPL community for hosting such an amazing event in Amsterdam. I'm sure everybody's having a lot of fun. I know we are. I'm so excited to be joined today by David Schwartz. He's CTO of Ripple, obviously one of the leading figures in the blockchain industry. And we're going to be talking about all things in terms of the future of blockchain and the road ahead. So tokenization, AI, we'll chat a little bit about the SEC court ruling, and all of that. So I'm very excited to get started with this panel. And David, is there anything you want to say before we get started? An introduction?
I do want to point out one thing that you guys, you may not even notice this, but you were seeing the debut of something brand new. Does anybody have any idea what I'm talking about? It's somewhere in this room. All right, I'm going to tell you. My new headshot.
Woo!
No, seriously, it's fantastic to be here. We've had a great time in Amsterdam. The community has been amazing, and this is just awesome. Like I said, my job isn't always fun, but this is always amazing.
Yes, this is a very fun event. So thanks again to the XRPL community and to you, David, for hosting us.
It's just been an incredible blast. I've spoken to so many people, and just the spirit of things that they want to develop, things that they're working on. It's just always energizing to come and see the community. I interact with the community on Twitter, email, and all kinds of other ways, but there's just nothing like a room full of people. Nothing compares to that energy, and it's something that I think a lot of us missed during the pandemic. Just being able to there's no difference. It's so much more tangible when you can actually see it. You know what I mean? When it actually is there in front of you in the form of bodies and people who walk up to you and have conversations, and excitement doesn't come through in an email. It doesn't really come through well in a Zoom conference. You can't build a movement. You can't, those kinds of things just have to happen in person. And so I'm just so excited to be here.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. So without further ado, let's get started with the fireside chat. So David, we have to address the elephant in the room, the SEC lawsuit. Many developers in the US have been closely watching the outcome. The court said that XRP is not in and of itself a security. So congrats to you and Ripple.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's big news. So with this landmark decision, what do you believe this outcome means for developers, both those building on the XRPL and in the wider blockchain community?
So it's not over yet, but I mean, this is a huge inflection point. It feels like there's kind of a bit of a change in the tide. Obviously, this ruling is enormous, specifically, as you mentioned, the finding that XRP, the token itself, is not a security, and that's not something that's being appealed or being disputed. That's as close to an established fact as you're going to get. But I think there's other signs that there's a bit of a tide turning. Coinbase pushing back very strongly, pushback on the Bitcoin ETF. So I'm hoping that this is a sort of turning point in the war, in the United States. We'll see how that goes. We're just 2.5 years from what I call the worst Christmas ever. I mean, that was just such a blow to our morale and to our spirit. And then 2.5 years without, any real good news on that front. And then this ruling just really, the case is not over, but it was a huge change. Unfortunately, that they want to they're going to create a problem. For companies like Ripple that have the money to operate outside the United States, it's not as big of a handicap, but my heart breaks for small groups of people who are located in the United States. Like, what are they supposed to do? You got a group of 5 or 6 people who are based in, let's say, San Francisco or something, or Austin, and they don't have the money to operate outside the United States. It's just sad to me that there could very well be a technological and financial revolution, and the United States has kind of, at least for now, decided to sit it out. But I mean, there's certainly cause for optimism. I think we're going to see pushes for change in regulation. I think one big setback to that, of course, was Sam Bankman-Fried. He was the voice of crypto regulation in Washington, D.C., and I think a lot of senators and congressmen stuck their neck out for him and basically said, look, this is someone, there are good actors in this space who want to see regulation to organize the space, and unfortunately, they feel like they were betrayed and they look like fools. And so now basically the movement for constructive regulation has become associated with one of the largest frauds in the industry. So I don't know. But on the bright side, there are certainly other regulatory jurisdictions where the environment is much more friendly. So there are certainly places in the world where you can build a project, and this isn't going to stop the technology. It just unfortunately may mean that the United States doesn't play as big a role in it as they could have. You know, I went through the sort of internet revolution, and that was very influential on me. And a lot of people may not know, particularly if they're younger, that there was a huge battle over the technology behind the internet around encryption, and, you know, criminals will use it to hide information so that, you know, law enforcement can't subpoena information to stop terrorist financing and spread of child pornography and radicalization of terrorists. And there was a big battle. I actually have an export license from the days when cryptography was considered munitions, and I had to get a license to export encryption software from the United States, from the Bureau of Export Administration, like they were, you know, rocket-launched, you know, RPGs or something, or missiles. I mean, we won that battle. You know, we won that battle, and the internet has democratized the flow of information in ways, you know, it used to be if you wanted to say something, you had to get a newspaper or a book publishing company or broadcast television station to let you do it, because there was no way to reach the world otherwise. And we won that battle, and so it's just sad to me that the United States has not taken a more active role.
Yeah, but it is exciting to see that Ripple is kind of leading the way and hopefully creating change for the regulatory environment in the United States. I mean, that's a lot of weight on Ripple's shoulders, but I do think that in the coming years, also with Coinbase and Binance, like, we'll see progress being made in the United States.
That's a big change from 2.5 years ago, because when the SEC first sued Ripple, like, a lot of the perception in the blockchain space was good. Like, they're going after the bad guys. You know, and they basically said that they basically felt that they would go after Ripple and then they would sort of stop, because like somehow we're like so bad, and I think I don't think anybody believes that anymore. I think it took 2.5 years. It took, you know, the SEC coming up with everything they could possibly find. You know, they never accused anybody there's no fraud accusations, you know, in the case. And then the SEC went after lots of other projects, and I think that was kind of the turning point, and they did it in a kind of underhanded way. In many cases, instead of going after the project themselves, they would go after an individual, basically saying that you committed this fraud with a security, attacking the project indirectly. And those kind of tactics have really changed the tide, at least in the perception inside the cryptocurrency community. You will find very few people today, maybe some Bitcoin maximalists, but that's like the only people you will find today who think that the SEC is actually like legitimately going after bad guys and trying to police the space. And I think there's a much broader perception that it's a power grab and regulation by enforcement. So that's good. Unfortunately, if you're trying to build in the United States, that doesn't help you very much yet. So.
Right, so that, you know, that leads me to my next question, which is how is this going to impact developers in the United States that are building? I mean, you know, I'm based in San Francisco part-time, where there's a ton of builders, and they're not leaving. And there's a lot of innovation in San Francisco and other places of the United States. So David, do you think that this is going to start pushing those people out of the United States? Because it seems like San Francisco is making a comeback, in my opinion.
It is pushing a lot of projects that hit those sort of hot button issues that the SEC has been pushing on out of the United States. If you're in the flow of funds, if you're like a staker in a DeFi contract, if you're launching a token where people are expecting you to, you know, continue to work on the project, those are the kinds of things where it's just very dangerous to operate in the United States. And even if you can do it legally, like for a startup, the compliance costs are just like the legal costs. Are just so outrageous. I've spoken to people who are going to launch startups, and they basically asked experts how much money they should set aside for legal and compliance, and it was essentially more than they thought they would need for like it would be their largest budget item ahead of like the cost of developers to actually build a technology from the ground up. It was more expensive to be able to sleep at night and not fear your own government than to build a technology from the ground up. So unfortunately, I still feel, I don't like to say it, but I do like to feel like if you're going to come anywhere near any of those hot button issues that the government has been pushing on, you really do just need to stay outside the United States. I hate to say that, but I mean, yeah. I like to sleep at night. I think other people do too.
Right, yeah, I do as well. But for people based in places like San Francisco, what projects or what are people building that you think it's okay to be in the United States?
You can be a technology provider if you're not in the flow funds. You can write software, that seems to be okay. I think you're okay on NFTs as long as, obviously I'm not a lawyer, get a legal opinion, but broadly speaking, I think you're okay if there isn't an expectation that you're going to build something else after you sell the NFT. So if I make an NFT and I sell it to you, and there's no expectation that that NFT is going to unlock something later, or that I'm going to continue to grow the ecosystem, where you're buying the NFT because you want that NFT, you're probably going to be okay. Obviously, get your own legal opinion. If you're writing DeFi software, but you're not in the flow of funds, or you're not because you wrote the software, like you saw what happened with Tornado Cash, where basically they were arguing that it was essentially a partnership because everybody who had a stake in the contract had some revenue from the mixing. So if you're in the flow of funds like that, if you're in control, and this is one of the sucky things where the regulation is supposed to protect consumers, and essentially what's probably going to wind up happening is people are going to have less control over these technologies to avoid the regulatory problems, and as a result, if something goes wrong with them, there isn't going to be any, I'm sure you've all heard stories of tokens locked in smart contracts that misbehave, and there's no way to get the tokens out, and it's too much of a regulatory risk for the people creating these contracts to leave themselves some way to control them. So I don't know. It's a little sad. I would say try to find a way to get out of the United States. Really find an environment that's more regulatory friendly if you're going to hit any of those hot buttons. If you're launching a token, if people are going to rely on you to build the platform, if you're going to have control over the flow of funds, any of those kinds of things. Sorry.
Yeah, no, let's switch gears a bit to a lighter topic. AI is revolutionizing various sectors. How do you see AI intersecting with blockchain technology? Are there any specific applications or concerns that come to your mind?
Well, I think when the Skynet robots start shooting at all of us, we'll use the blockchain to buy the things we need to defend ourselves from the AI robots.
That's a great use case. I'm going to write about that.
No, seriously though, there's a lot of different AI-related. First of all, I'll just give you my broad take on AI, which is that it is going to be a big deal. I'm not one of the doom and gloom people. I don't think we need to forget about everything else and focus on preventing AI robots from killing us or something. I do think there are threats with it. Any new technology is going to have threats. I don't think this is on the scale of the threat of nuclear war or biological weapons, but I do think it is a technology that does present legitimate threats. One of the examples of a threat, and then I'll talk about the good stuff, but one example of a threat is the prospect of deep fakes. I think we're probably only a couple of years away from it being within the budget of any evil genius who's got $1 million to be able to produce hundreds of concurrent live streams of an event that's not happening. And so you could imagine a situation where maybe 5 years from now, someone on $1 million budget can create dozens and dozens of live streams of a terrorist attack in London that is not actually happening. And meanwhile, everybody else is, here I am in London, there's no terrorist attack, what are you talking about? And we might have a very difficult time figuring out which is real and which is the fake. And that's a situation that we could really be in. And it's kind of funny, about at least 20 years ago, I was asked a very similar question about fakes at a very, very different conference from this one, as you might imagine. And I said that democracy allows people to have differences of opinion, but generally assumes that they can agree on facts. If you're going to have an election, we have to agree on who the candidates are. When is election day? These basic things. We should be able to agree on who the current leadership is, right? These are basic facts that we should be able to agree on as the sort of base from which we can have our differences of opinion. If we can't do that, it's hard to imagine how you can have a functional democracy. In the United States, the example I gave, I was in the United States at the time, is I gave an example of an election where we might not even be able to agree on who the current president is. And it turns out to be very prophetic, because if you know what's going on in U.S. politics right now, there's a significant group of people who are saying we can't trust the results of the election, and there's another significant group of people saying there's absolutely no reason to say, there's no basis in fact for that claim. And this is a very basic factual, the kind of thing that should not be in dispute. And AI is going to make those types of disputes much more common and much more difficult to address. It's going to make it much more easily for people who want to create that type of confusion to do so. And that's also going to mean it's going to be harder to hold people to account. Let's say I do some terrible thing and there's video evidence and there's pictures and you've got all the evidence that you would have needed 40, 30, 20 years ago to be absolutely certain I had done this. I don't know, maybe I shoot somebody and there's a video of me holding the gun and right? I can claim that's a deep fake. And there's a problem in that how plausible is that claim and how can you know whether I'm telling the truth or not? And that's going to leave us in a situation where it's going to be very hard to hold people accountable. And it's going to put pressure on things like our justice systems. It used to be that forensic evidence wasn't a thing. All you had was if you had eyewitnesses or you couldn't tell who did something. Today, we have lots of forensic evidence. We have things like DNA and bullet matching a bullet to a gun. And there have been some abuses. I don't know how many of you know about some of the stories of abuses of people who claimed that they could match bite marks to teeth when they couldn't, people who claimed that they could prove that fires were arson when it was just complete, pseudoscience. We're going to have another wave of that, but it's not going to be pseudoscience. It's going to be the ability to falsify evidence. It's going to be so easy to falsify evidence so conclusively. And then, of course, we're going to have people who are going to attack legitimate evidence on the grounds that we can't tell that it's not falsified. The only way I see blockchain helping much with that is at least blockchain can prevent you from reconstructing the past. So blockchain can't prevent me from making a false claim now, but it can prevent me from making a false claim about something that happened in the past because we may be able to use it to date things more accurately. So if there's some legitimate footage from a certain date, it could be time-stamped through a blockchain, and that could make it harder for me to sort of reconstruct the past and claim that some footage I'm showing you now was something that happened in the past. That's a small victory, but it's a victory. So from the doom and gloom to the good stuff, some of the potential for AI, AI image generation has come an incredible, I don't know if any of you guys saw my tweet, but I had a tweet where I showed what AI image generation looked like just 1 year ago and what it looks like today, and the difference is just astounding. It's just astronomical. And but not nearly as important as what things like ChatGPT and large language models have been able to do. And that's a very dangerous technology because they have no conception of morality or truth. What they try to do is they try to give you the answer they think you want. And they're very good at giving you what you think you want, which has little to do with whether it's truthful or accurate in many domains. I'm sure many of you have seen, I tweeted about it, the lawyers who cited cases that did not exist because AI created those cases. Because typically when you answer a legal question, you cite cases, and people want you to cite cases. So it cited cases. It didn't know that it was important that you cite cases that in fact exist. It had no idea that that was kind of a very important thing in the law, which it is very, very important thing in law. These lawyers are very lucky that they didn't get this far, but we're going to see a lot more of that. We're going to see a lot more of reliance on AI without people understanding the limitations of AI. The other thing is that AI cannot, it can't be racist or biased in the way you and I ordinarily understand those terms, but it can create the exact same effect. It can do the same thing a racist person would do. So a racist person might look at job candidates and discriminate on the basis of race and not prefer the candidates who are the race that they don't like. And we can make an AI, we can just not tell it race. And so in theory, it can't do that. But what winds up happening is it winds up preferring candidates who have, in their background, they have things like their name is Chad, which, let's be honest, that's a proxy for gender and race. There's no reason to prefer people named Chad. There's no rational reason. But the AI isn't doing it because the AI is racist or misogynist or something. The AI is saying, well, you hired people named Chad in the past and they were successful, and whether that may be because you had biased practice, that may be because of biased human practices, but it will carry through those biases because the biases are inherent in the data. If you ask it to draw a woman, you'll probably get a young white woman, because most of the training, that's what a lot of the training data consists of. And if you want someone from another race, you have to tell it that. So it's sort of the default is whatever is dominant in its input data. And what's dominant in its input data can carry forward human biases. And that's a huge problem that can happen without us ever intending to do it. And the biggest problem is most AIs are black boxes. ChatGPT cannot tell you why it gave you a particular answer. So if it gives you an answer like, hey, this person shouldn't be on probation, they're likely to reoffend, it can't tell you why it said that. It can't enumerate what factors it used. So if it used the fact that that person's name wasn't Chad, it can't tell you that. And so it's very difficult to see how the biases in the input data make it through into the output data. I don't know if blockchain is going to be able to help with any of those things, but I know that those are going to be real problems that we're going to have to tangle with.
Yeah, that's a great answer, really insightful. What are your thoughts on AI chatbots for developers to write software faster or just like easier? I think I had a conversation, well, I did have a conversation yesterday about someone at RippleX was mentioning that. Do you have any thoughts on AI being used for that?
I think it's a fantastic time saver. You do have to be very careful with it, but it is a great time saver. There are a number of similar tools like frameworks that don't use AI, but this is sort of like a turbocharged version of that. That may also sort of democratize the ability to code. There's a lot of gatekeeping in coding. Like if you want to write code like in the XRP Ledger software itself, the cost of admission is very high. Like the knowledge base that you need in order to do that just without breaking something is extraordinarily high. And anything that we can do to sort of reduce that barrier to entry is going to be a really good thing. AI is one of the technologies that does seem to be improving that quite a bit. I have not messed with it myself yet. So I can't tell you what the firsthand experience is like, but I've seen people who wanted to write a game in a particular framework, and they told the AI just the most basic parameters of the game, and they actually had a functional working game, like a couple of iterations, like, oh, you didn't understand what I meant by this, but a very like conversational interaction, and then they had a working game. They had all the framework, and then they could, change the places where they wanted things that were really different. But that's a pretty significant time saver. I can tell you, as a programmer, a lot of time is spent in boilerplate. A lot of time is spent in just, like, I want a class that does these things and has these members, and I need, and it's just a lot of time just turning that into code before you actually get to do the sort of creative part. And anything that could streamline that is going to be fantastic. We'll see how that goes. But I mean, if you look at where AI has come in just 2 years, I don't see any reason that's going to slow down. Some technologies, you see these revolutions and then they sort of slow down, and so then they don't have the impact that you might have thought. But I don't see this slowing down. I think we're going to continue to. I guess the thing that's frightening to me is the algorithms that ChatGPT uses are really dumb. Like if I explain them in detail, you'd be like, seriously, that's what ChatGPT is doing? That doesn't sound like that should be able to produce anything. Like we thought that like if you wanted to create something that could do the kinds of things that ChatGPT could do, you'd have to do them more or less the way a human brain works. You'd have to sort of like implement general intelligence. And it turns out that you can fake a very significant fraction of what we think of as intelligence in these I hate to say it, but they're shockingly dumb. They're basically just pattern matching. They basically find patterns in the input and replicate them in the output by giving the output that tends to match the types of inputs. Like, we don't think of that as intelligence. We think of that as just like very simple number crunching. And it's a little frightening to think that what we think of as the outputs of intelligence may be easily produced with algorithms that don't seem very intelligent to us. I don't know where I was going with that, but I hope you found that.
Yeah. I mean, no, because I think a lot of people think AI has all the answers, but like you said, I agree, it's a time saver. I'm not going to use it for writing because I'm a very good writer and I don't need help with that, but maybe someone who's not a good writer may want to use an AI tool to help them save time to write a paragraph or whatever.
That I have used ChatGPT for, and it's been tremendously helpful.
Okay.
I'm super awkward with certain types of things. Like certain types of responses to people, like when a project doesn't go well and you have to tell the team, hey, I understand you guys, did what you needed, you tried your best and, it failed through no fault of your own. Like if you go to ChatGPT and you say, I need to send a message to a team that worked really hard on a project but failed due to external events they had no control over, and I want to, motivate them to keep at it and express sympathy. How should I do that? And he'll do a phenomenally good job of giving you a letter. Or if you say like, I invited my best friend to my wedding, but my fiance hates him. How do I tell him he's not invited without hurting his feelings? Like, I don't know how to do that, but ChatGPT is fantastic. ChatGPT is actually fantastic at that kind of thing. Seriously, give it a try.
Cases. Yeah, no, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing, David.
It's better at emotions than I am.
Yeah, no, I mean that's crazy.
But in fairness, though, what it's doing is there's a lot of emotional content in its input. and it's sort of mining that and spitting it back out. It is not, it handles emotions the same way like Mark Zuckerberg does.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I had to write a creative piece one time, and because I'm not a creative writer, I used to be, but now I'm just very straightforward. I actually did ask ChatGPT for help, and it was very emotional and creative.
Yeah, it seems like it, right?
Yeah, it was much more emotional and creative than I am.
But what it's doing, though, is that it is, I mean, in a literal sense, it's not emotional or creative. What it's doing is there's a tremendous amount of emotional and creative input. And the funny thing is like we think of being creative as finding things that are not in the input, right? Like if you're just regurgitating the input, that's not creative. But it turns out that a very significant fraction of what we describe as creative is just rearranging input. And the proof of that is that you can give ChatGPT a question and it can produce an output that honestly seems creative.
Yeah.
And so it's a little frightening to think like when we're creative, are we just, reorganizing input the same, I think we solve problems very differently from the way AI does. It's just shocking that the things that we thought that you needed, the sort of emotion and commitment to truth and all the sort of things that we value in people that we interact with that we thought you needed to produce those types of outputs, you can produce those outputs without having those things.
Right.
That's scary.
Yeah, it's crazy. Okay, let's talk about tokenization. The concept of tokenization has grown beyond just cryptocurrency. Assets, rights, and even identities are getting tokenized today. So how do you envision the broader role of tokenization in reshaping finance, and where does XRPL fit into the narrative?
Yeah, there's been a lot of interest recently in real-world asset tokenization, even from outside the crypto space, from traditional finance. I think people are starting to realize that there's a lot of friction in the transfer of certain types of value. Real estate is like the best example of an area where there's high friction. And some of that friction is inherent. If I'm buying a piece of real estate, like I have to check it out. It's not, real estate is the ultimate in something that's not fungible. But a lot of that is just legacy, the way the systems work. Things like small investments, things like loans and mortgages, like tokenizing those things democratizes access to them. And for people who live in some countries, like particularly the United States, where we're incredibly overbanked and we have access to financial services of all kinds, it doesn't really resonate with us the type of the problems that people who don't have like that type of industry catering to them that they have. Like if you ask an American and they'll tell you, oh, I hate my bank, and you say, why? And it's like, oh, because I have to press 1 for English at the ATM, and I'm in America, why? American bank, why should I have to press 1 for English? They love their bank. I mean, if that's their biggest complaint, they love their bank. They're well served. Credit cards suck, there's that fee, but the consumer doesn't see it. And so consumers are well served by those technologies, but you don't have to go far outside of that small first world bubble to find people who are very poorly served, people who basically have to stuff money in a mattress and hope that the government doesn't depreciate it. And tokenized assets can democratize access to quality investment products, tokenized loans that can be collateralized, can provide people access to financial services that they just haven't been able to have access to. And I think that's going to be tremendous, because it just isn't possible to serve some of these markets with traditional financial products. And that's why you see people who are underbanked or unbanked throughout the world, where they're just too spread out and there isn't enough conventional financial infrastructure. But they do have internet and they do have smartphones, and so they have what they need. They have what they need for people to serve them. It's the lack of financial infrastructure. And as you saw in many third world countries that skip landlines, they're going to skip traditional financial infrastructure too. And for much the same reason, it's very difficult to build branches of a bank. Who even uses bank branches anymore? I remember when online banking first became a thing, and I remember there were articles that online, it makes no sense, because there's only 2 things a person wants to do at a bank: deposit their paycheck and get cash. And those are 2 things you can't do online. Well, you can do the equivalent of those 2 things online right now. First of all, you don't even need to deposit your paycheck. That's all handled online now. But you can deposit your paycheck from a phone. And while you can't get physical cash, you can do the equivalent because you can load onto a prepaid card, or you can have a prepaid card attached to your account. Like, those things have all been replaced by higher tech substitutes that don't require you. It really wouldn't be inconvenient at all if you didn't live near a branch of your bank. It used to be you would go to your local bank branch because that's where all your financial services would be. You don't go there for a loan. How many people would go to a local bank branch if they need a loan, right? Like, nobody would do that anymore. So I think we're going to see that type of revolution with real-world asset tokenization and democratizing access to things like real estate and loans and all kinds of investments built into the XRP ledger. So I'm hoping that we're going to see, as real-world asset tokenization projects grow, I think the XRP ledger is going to be a really good platform for them to launch on, particularly because of the low fees and because of the integration with the DEX, with the proximity to sort of the movement of funds. The ability, if someone's going to buy, what do you want to do with a real-world tokenized asset? You want to buy it, you want to sell it, you want to hold it, you want to transfer it. And if you want to buy it and sell it, you want to be able to do that with whatever asset is convenient for you. You don't want to tie, if you tokenize some sort of debt, like, you don't want to tie it to US dollars, because then that limits access to it to people who have sort of proximity to US dollars. One of the things the XRP ledger is good for is giving you sort of proximity to many different assets, and that exchange is seamlessly built in. So I think that's one of the many reasons why the XRP ledger is going to be a good place to launch tokenized real-world assets. I think we'll see that in the next year and a half.
Cool, yeah, and there's already, yeah. And there's already a number of projects using the XRP ledger for tokenization use cases. So yeah, hopefully we'll see more. We will see more.
It's funny how many projects I found out about because they filed briefs in our litigation with the SEC. That was the weirdest thing ever. I don't know if you guys remember numerous participants in the XRP ledger ecosystem filed briefs with the court saying, hey, we're using the SEC has said the XRP has no utility. And there were projects I'd never heard of. I'd never seen. It's like the least efficient way for me to find out about.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, actually. Okay. Let's talk about interoperability. How crucial, in your opinion, is cross-chain collaboration? And how is Ripple and XRPL approaching this? And what do you think developers should keep in mind when it comes to that?
Well, I think that's critical. I think the idea that I don't think there is anybody yet, again, maybe a couple of Bitcoin maximalists who think even the Bitcoin ecosystem has accepted that, like, the layer one is not, everything is not going to happen on layer one. They've all come to accept that interoperability is going to be important, that different blockchains are going to have to focus on different use cases and target different groups of people. So interoperability is going to have to exist to make that painless. If there's a layer one and it serves some subset of what people want, but not everything, if you think about technologies that have been successful, the internet being my favorite example, like, everything that you want is on the internet. And if it's not, why the hell isn't it? Like, where the hell else would it be, right? Like, that ecosystem has everything you could possibly want it. And that's why probably every single person in this room has a phone on them that gives them access to the internet. And the vast majority of you probably have home internet access. And it's not for any one specific thing. It's because the whole ecosystem has tremendous value to you. And it's that portability. If you had to have one smartphone to access Twitter and one smartphone for email and one type of home access to do work stuff, like, it would not be compelling at all. It would be a terrible experience. And so interoperability and commitment to standards is going to be extremely important if we're going to have a compelling ecosystem. If we don't have a compelling ecosystem, then we're not going to be able to build a wall around the XRP ledger and get people inside that wall. No cryptocurrency has that kind of market power yet. And so it's going to have, and the value proposition is the openness.
Yeah.
So that's going to mean interoperability is going to be critical.
Definitely, yeah. With the emergence of various layer 2 solutions and side chains in different blockchain projects, how do you see the evolution of XRPL in terms of scalability and layer 2 integrations, and what opportunities does this present for developers?
Yeah, so that's kind of the other half of what I was just saying. So the way the interoperability is going to look probably for the XRP ledger is probably going to be side chains or sort of adjacent layer ones. So if you think about a feature like any sort of feature that's kind of heavy and that requires like tremendous resources to implement, hooks is a good example of a feature that's like moderately heavy. there's costs associated with adopting it on the main chain. There's benefits too, but there's also costs. And there are going to be features that are good and that people will want where the costs associated with implementing it on main chain are going to mean that that's not going to be doable. And the other thing that you have is whatever capability the main chain has, however many transactions per second it can handle, there will be people who want more transactions than that for some use case. There'll be some use case that requires some very, very high number of transactions. There may be somebody who wants to issue millions of NFTs. And their use case may be very important to them, and the rest of us may not care about it. It doesn't make sense to put it on main chain. But we don't want to exclude that person from the ecosystem because there would be no reason. There'd be no reason to say no to someone who wants to build something that adds value to the ecosystem. It just can't go on the main chain. So what that means is that we need to have a robust ecosystem of things like side chains and other layer ones, and we need asset portability. Because one of the most difficult things about launching a sidechain is getting assets that have actual value on it. And so there's a proposal for bridge support on the XRP ledger, which will help to bridge assets to the XRP ledger. And that way, when you develop some new technology, and you want to prove that it works. So let's say you came up with some new idea for the XRP ledger to do, I don't know, crypto collateralized stable coins or something. It doesn't matter. Or maybe some new form of smart contracts or some other DeFi thing that nobody else thought of. And you propose it to the XRP ledger. The burden that you have is convincing people that the resource consumption won't be burdensome, that it won't destabilize the network, that it doesn't have a bug in it that allows funds to be stolen. One of the best ways to prove that is to actually deploy the technology live with real money and show it working. Say, look, here you go. We've got this chain on which it's running, and what's a how is going to do for hooks. You say, look, it's working. Obviously, it could break, but if it works, look, it's working. Here it is handling real money. Our validators are stable. Their resource consumption is reasonable. The network is working. This is proof that this is safe to adopt, and that will help to sort of overcome that heavy burden that we don't want to make changes to main chain that could risk destabilizing the network or causing other problems. And so that ecosystem is going to be good for the main chain. It's going to be good for developers who want to build on a side chain. And it gives you immediate horizontal scalability. Anytime you have another layer one or another chain, however many transactions it has, that is at zero cost to mainnet. And so you can immediately have, another chain with 1,000 transactions per second, or it could be a chain that's heavier or lighter, has different features that you want. That's going to enable people to broaden that ecosystem. And it's also going to lower the sort of cost of admission. Right now, you want to get a feature running with real money, you got to get it adopted on mainnet, which is very, very difficult to do. Being able to launch it on a sidechain is just going to streamline that process.
Cool. Let's talk a little bit about user experience, because as the crypto landscape evolves, user experience is becoming paramount for wider adoption. So what user experiences challenges do you believe still need to be solved within the XRPL ecosystem, and how can developers play a role in solving those challenges?
Yeah, user experience is like the most important thing when you're trying to get anybody other than enthusiasts. When you're trying to attract enthusiasts, they care about the technology. If you want to sell me a computer, tell me what CPU is in it, tell me what SSD it has, tell me how much RAM it has, tell me the clock timings on the RAM, and I'm excited about that. But that's not how you sell a computer to like my mom, right? Like what matters to her is, am I going to be able to use it? Is it going to break? Am I going to be able to understand what I'm doing, or is it going to constantly ask me confusing questions that I don't know how to answer, and I feel like I'm not having a good experience while I'm using it? For retail adoption, for mass adoption, for anyone but an enthusiast, your product is the user experience, right? A car manufacturer doesn't just sell a car, they sell the experience of not just driving their car, but owning their car. They sell the experience of having a flat tire and having to deal with roadside service. They sell the experience of having to do maintenance on it, the experience of ownership, and that's very important to people. And if they get a good experience, then they like that product, and that's how you get that sort of mass retail adoption. And that's totally different from the enthusiast market. We hit an inflection point around the introduction of NFTs, where we started to see, coming from the crypto, like prior to that, almost everything in the cryptocurrency space was aimed at enthusiasts. The idea was you had to really care about decentralization, and you had to care about the tech and understand what encryption and digital signatures were to use the tech, and that was fine because that was what everybody was excited about. But we first started to see projects, NFT-based, I think were around the very first, that were basically all around the user experience, that were like, NBA Hotshots is a good example. Top Shots, excuse me, was a good example of they were not that successful, but they sold something like $1 billion worth of NFTs before they failed. So it's hard to use them as a bad example. I mean, that was astonishing, right? But what was interesting was that how many of their customers even knew what technology they were using? I don't even know that most of them cared. What they cared about was that there were players in the NBA that they liked and they owned a piece of them that nobody else owned, and that's what was important. It was that user experience. And so it's going to be extremely critical if you're aiming for mass adoption that the user experience be fantastic. One of the biggest problems, of course, is custody. There's no technical service for the XRP ledger. Like if you make a bad transaction, there's no friendly person answering the customer service phone number to help, the stereotypical, mom to be able to resolve a problem. And some of that is inherent in the technology, and that's something we're going to have to figure out. Every technology that's got mass adoption has had to figure that out. If some of you are old enough to remember copying machines like 20 years ago and printers, they broke down all the time. And if you wanted to have one, you had to have an office with someone professional coming around to service it routinely. And that means nobody's going to be able to print things at home. Like they had to solve the problem of making the technology reliable and bulletproof, and just nail down those user experiences. And that's what we have to do if we want mass adoption.
Yeah, those are great points. I agree 100%. So we only have time for a few more questions, and I want to leave time for some jokes because David has a ton of great jokes. But the last question I'll ask before we get into the jokes, what are you looking forward to in terms of APEX 2024 next year, which I believe is in June? Mm-hmm. Possibly in Amsterdam?
Right, yes, it's going to be in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
June 2024. I want to see all of you there. You too.
Everyone here needs
you,
to be
not
here.
so much.
But what are you looking
forward to? Not indicating any specific person. This guy here lost smile at me, thinks I was indicating him. I was pointing in his general direction, but I was pointing over him, actually the guy right behind him. Yeah, you. Yeah. Yep, the one nodding. Yep. You're excused.
Everyone is welcome next year, and we hope to see all of you. But David, what are you looking forward to? Like, what do you hope to talk about next year? What are you excited about?
Well, I really hope that I'm going to be able to talk about how amazing the AMM implementation went and have some actual numbers on how it's actually working. But I'm also just very excited to see what members of the community are able to come up with that I can't, ever think of. And of course, you'll get an update on real-world asset tokenization, which I think is going to come pretty far. And of course, decentralized identity and all of those other things that I talked about should be, pretty far along.
Cool.
Anything else before the jokes?
No, we've got 3 minutes for jokes. I know sometimes your jokes can be about 3 minutes, so.
Well, you know what I'll do? I haven't told a pirate joke in a while, and in honor of hooks, I'm going to tell my favorite pirate joke. This is my absolute favorite pirate joke of all. It's a tight field because there's a lot of pirate jokes. I just have to apologize. I cannot do a pirate accent. I apologize for that. You will not hear a pirate accent. You'll have to imagine that the lines that pirate says are in a pirate accent, but I'm not even going to try to do it. So a man just finished work, and he's walking home, and he's kind of thirsty. He passes by a bar, and he decides that he'll stop in and get something to drink. So he stops in the bar, and he sees a man at the end of the bar in a pirate costume. And I mean the most amazing Hollywood-grade pirate costume you've ever seen. Peg leg, hook hand, eye patch, everything but the parrot. And he walks up to the guy, and he says, I can't help but noticing that is one of the most incredible pirates anywhere. He goes, no, there still are pirates. He's like, no, there aren't pirates. And it's like, no, there still are pirates. I'm a pirate. He says, all right, if you're a pirate, how'd you get the peg leg? He says, well, you're never going to believe this. It was my very first day as a pirate. Got into a battle, you know how it happens, and lost my leg. Won the battle, but they cut my leg off. When you're a pirate, you get a peg leg. The guy's like, I guess I don't know what I expected, but okay. I don't know that I believe that, but all right, tell me about the hook hand. He says, well, you're never going to believe this one. It was my second day as a pirate. I got into another battle, and I was unsteady because of the peg leg, and they cut my arm off. And when you're a pirate and you lose your arm, you get a hook hand. He goes, oh, I guess I don't know what I expected. I guess that makes sense. I don't know if I believe that, but I guess in for a penny, in for a pound. How'd you get the eye patch? He says, well, you're never going to believe this one. It was my third day as a pirate. We were coming into port, and I heard a sound up above me. And so I looked up, and a seagull just relieved himself right in my eye. He goes, I don't know that I believe the peg leg. I don't know about the hook hand. But there is no way I'm going to believe that you lost your eye because a seagull, crapped in your eye. He says, well, you have to remember, son, it was my first day with the hook.
That is a great joke, David.
Thank you.
Cool. Well, on that note, I think
Nothing can follow that.
Yeah, nothing can follow that, so I think we're good here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This has been an amazing event. I can't wait until next year's event. And David, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. I'm sure the audience has gained some very insightful information from this fireside. So
Thank you for doing this great show.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
thanks, yeah.
Thanks, everyone.